In this video, we're going to demonstrate how to set up a Matko wireless remote display. In our example today, we're going to be using a 4-inch wireless remote display, but take note that these steps will also apply to both a 2-inch and a 6-inch as well. Matko wireless products give you the ability to send signals such as RS-232 wirelessly through the air to another device. In our demonstration today, we're going to generate some RS-232 signal on this laptop. And we're going to send it through a wire into this XTP transceiver. And this transceiver will take that signal, convert it to a wireless signal, and send it over to this Matko wireless remote display. You might be wondering why you would want to use wireless, and well, there's a lot of situations where wireless just makes sense. For example, there are a lot of situations where you're in a site where you have to run a long cable for a very long distance, where the indicator is a long distance from where the remote display is located. And you could dig a trench and run a wire for miles, or you could use a setup like this and just send that signal wirelessly and avoid all of that expense. That's not all there is to it though. There are some things that you need to take note of and weigh the pros and cons when you're deciding to go wireless. There are situations when wireless works really well, like the example I just gave you, but there are also situations where wireless is not a good option. Matko wireless products work really well when there's line of sight between the wireless module that's sending the signal and the device that is receiving the signal. This line of sight that we're talking about, it even works really well when you're sending it through windows or glass. This technology tends to struggle when you have large objects that are blocking the line of sight, especially if they're made out of concrete or metal. There are ways that you can get around this by using multiple XTPs as repeaters to go around objects, but that's outside of the scope of this video. One last thing to take note of is that the wireless capabilities of these devices can be improved with antenna upgrade modules. All right, well, with that out of the way, let's get started setting up this display. In our example today, we're using a wireless version of a Matko SBL4. The product number for that is SBL4-XTP. This product is a package. It includes both the display itself and the XTP module, so you have everything that you need to get set up with wireless. If you take a look at the bottom of this display, you'll notice that there's an antenna, and that's because there is a wireless receiver built into this display. That way we can just send the signal straight from the transceiver so that the display can receive it directly. So the first step is to attach the XTP to your indicator. In our case, we're going to be sending the signal from this laptop here, but in most situations, it's going to be coming from an indicator. All right, there's a couple of prerequisites when we're looking at this XTP transceiver here. I already have the power plugged in to the outlet, so we're getting power to the XTP, and we are also have a data line coming in from the laptop as well. In your case, it's probably an indicator. We have our quick start guide right here, and I have the data line coming in to the RS-232 ports. You'll notice right here that we have our ground wire plugged into ground and our data line coming into the RxD port. Now for my setup here today, I have the data coming out at 9600 baud, 8 data bits, no parity. And you can see that there is a green blinking light on the RS-232, which is basically telling us that the XTP sees that there is indeed signal coming in through the data line. Now, if you have more than one wireless setup on site, you need to pay attention to these dip switches right here. If you have more than one wireless setup on site, you can use these dip switches to pick one of 16 possible channels that are available. As long as the dip switches on the device that's receiving the signal match the dip switches on the XTP transceiver that's sending the signal, they can communicate with each other. Now, in our situation, we only have one pair of devices that are operating, so we can leave all of the dip switches in the off position on both devices. One thing to take note of is when you do change the dip switches, you'll notice that the config light turns on. This means that the XTP needs to be configured because you changed the dip switches. So all you have to do to apply the changes is press the configure button, and you'll see these green lights. And now everything is set up. Now that the XTP transceiver is set up and sending signal, let's go over to the remote display and teach it to receive this signal. All right, we've taken the XTP and set it to the side. Now let's take a look at this remote display. You'll notice that I've taken the right side panel off already, and we're going to take a look at the motherboard on the side of this display. Okay, so one of the things that you might notice when you first take a look at this, there is actually a config light on the wireless module of this board as well. That means that it needs to be configured. Again, just like with the XTP, if you flip any of these dip switches, it's going to take this configure light and turn it on, letting you know that the display needs to be configured to receive the wireless signal. Now, remember, we had all of our dip switches in the off position on the XTP. So we want to make sure that all the dip switches on this receiving module are off as well. All we have to do after that is just press this configure button. You're going to see the green lights, and it should start receiving the wireless signal. As you can see on this display, we have weight data coming in from that laptop, like I said, that we were using for demonstration. And the only wire attached to this display is the power cord. That's because all of the data coming in on this display is coming in wirelessly from the XTP module. So that is how you set up and configure a Matko wireless package. Wireless can be a cost-effective solution in the correct situation, but you need to remember that you have to have a clear line of sight between the signal sender and the receiving device. You also need to make sure that the dip switches are set correctly so that your sending device and your receiving device can talk to each other, especially if you have multiple wireless setups on the same location. I hope that this helped you understand how to set up a Matko wireless display. And feel free to check out some of our other videos on our other Matko products.